Hey, all right, so pop quiz. What do Scholastic Publishing, Random House Publishing, DK Publishing, and Grosset and Dunlap Publishing all have in common? It's that they've all, to some varying degree or other, published cool further glimpses into the Star Wars Clone Wars. Legends, EU, Star Wars Clone Wars. So without going into really everything that all those various groups have done, because that would be a video that would take a very long time. Although what I'd like to do at some point is to have separate videos on all of those separate products. I just want to take kind of a real random sample of some of that stuff just to sort of kind of highlight the full range of available Clone Wars content that's out there that you may or may not know about. And I'll say a little bit about some of the pros and cons of everything and whether it's worth adding to your collection if you're a purist or a completist or not, and where you can potentially pick some of this stuff up. Let's start with Scholastic really quick. Scholastic is really unique. Now, if you're a hardcore Star Wars EU Legends fan, you probably know about some of the older Scholastic products like the Star Wars Mission series, the 20-volume, really cool sort of like role-playing game supplement guides. You also know about things like the Star Wars Adventure series. This is one of the game books. Let's see if I've got sort of pick up a random corresponding novel here, right? This is actually, believe it or not, from episode 2, even though Sebulba's on there. One thing that they did was they had an episode 1 and episode 2 run. At the very end of the episode 2 run of this adventure series, they ended up just republishing some of the episode 1 stories, which is why Sebulba, oddly enough, features on an episode 2 story. So the novel was sort of some background supplemental story information, some really cool new content, although in a lot of cases it's just drawn on some of the stuff from the flicks. And then the game books are some really cool ideas, doing your own sort of like dice-oriented Star Wars role-playing games, sort of centered around some of this content. So anyway, that's not Clone Wars per se. It's just some of the stuff that you might already know about from Star Wars and Scholastic. One really unique thing that Scholastic did was actually to adapt one of the Filoni Clone Wars episodes into this pretty substantive book on Darth Maul's Shadow Conspiracy, and I think we're talking about, God, 170 odd pages or so. It's a book. It's the real deal. So if you're the sorts of person that loves to read the novelizations of things, I mean, the novelizations of the Star Wars movies themselves are always amazing in my view. I think you're always going to learn just a little bit more about the characterization, about the background. It's just where you get to get into more depth, right? No, this is no different. And I think what's really neat about this one is that I don't think it's entirely well known, partially because Scholastic didn't really do a lot with the Clone Wars, haven't done a lot for Star Wars in really sort of a substantive content-oriented way since some of the adventures and mission series and stuff that they published years before. The coolest thing about this one is that at least as of right now, at beginning of 2017, this is actually something still available for new from Amazon. So this is one of the few things from the Legends EU continuity that's not going to have a Legends banner that you can still just buy new in stores or at least on Amazon. So definitely worth picking up. It's a really cool addition to the bookshelf just because it's, like I said, it's pretty substantive. It's not some tiny little, quarter of an inch thick children's book. That's a really, really neat thing. Okay, let's take a look now at, Grosset and Dunlap. Now, they've done a lot. I guess I'd feel confident saying that of all the media tie-ins and all of the sort of the book and comics licenses and things like that for children, that Grosset and Dunlap's probably done by far the most for the Clone Wars. Now, again, most of this stuff it's focused around the Filoni Clone Wars, the later Clone Wars. We're not talking, for instance, about the 2003 Tartakovsky Clone Wars episodes, which, if you haven't seen, you should immediately rush to pick up and watch. They're available on YouTube as well. They are fantastic stuff. I know that people have some, from time to time, more mixed views about the Filoni Clone Wars, but, for better or worse, they're a part of Disney's Star Wars canon, but they're a part of ours as well. Now, just as a brief reminder, some of the Tartakovsky Clone Wars things were put into sort of comic digest form by Dark Horse. This stuff's really great. What Dark Horse did later, when the new Filoni Clone Wars came out, was to keep the digest idea running with things like In Service to the Republic and various others. So definitely worth checking out, definitely worth diving into. But for Grosset and Dunlap, they did a combination of things. Now, you can go ahead and just pick up the adult novelization of the Clone Wars movie. Again, pretty substantive book. This was the movie that came out, a number of years before the reboot, the actual cartoon movie about the sort of the hunt for the hunt for Stinky the Hutt or whatever. But Again, this is about, gosh, about another 160-page book or something. Pretty cool, pretty worth checking out. The novelizations of the stories are always pretty cool. Then there's lots of sort of one-offs like this. Things like Captured, things like Hunt for Grievous. There's even things that are digest size, but that are actual, they're books. I mean, they're novels. And things like Warriors of the Deep. So adaptations of some of the stories. The thing is, though, the Grosset and Dunlap, it's so varied. It's not like there's just one thing, you know. It's not like there's just, you know, one size, one digest size, or one sort of comic book size thing. It's all over the place. So you got these tall and skinny guys that are sort of, they're adaptations, in some cases more loose than others, of some of the Filoni cartoon shows. You've got these book size things that are just straight up, you know, novelizations of some of the episodes. You've got a thing like Bounty Hunters, right, Boba Fett, which is based on one of the episodes, and it's kind of a mix of illustrations and prose and everything, and the list just goes on. And they've even got things like this that are really big and really sort of oddly shaped, you know, almost like placemat size, really skinny thing, Battle at Teth. They've got one that's even bigger, The Battle Begins, and this is in hardcover. Some of the Grosset and Dunlap stuff is going to be in hardcover. Some of it's going to be in paperback. It's just going to depend. Some of it's going to be in both. It just really depends on your preference, if you know which you want to pick up. They went further, though. I mean, they didn't just stop with some of these, you know, illustrated guides and novelization guides and various other things in some of these like smaller children's books, but they've got pop-up books and activity books and sticker books and things like that, which to some extent tell you a little bit more of the story. And if you're a completist and you want to know everything, well, they're at least worth picking up, and they look great on the shelf. If you're a completist, why not add it? If you've got the space, go for it. Grosset and Dunlap even has things like this. Now, you might or might not remember this, but because I don't think this is available anymore, but it was an online game, Clone Wars oriented game, kind of based around the Filoni Clone Wars show. And it's really cool. Grosset and Dunlap put together this really substantive guide to the game. And, you know, it's giving you tips and tricks. Now, this stuff isn't going to be relevant anymore if you can't play the game. But to the extent it tells you just a little bit more about the story, I think that's cool, right? It's written by Daniel Wallace, so it's got some really, really great stuff in it. Gosh, I mean, they just did so many other cool things. This is one of my favorite things they did, because this is you know, broadly sort of related to the Filoni Clone Wars. It's sort of set in that era with that same kind of feel. But this is some really awesome original content. It's their Secret Mission series, and it was a 4-volume series. And one of the most amazing things about this is that, boy, if you ever wanted to know a little bit more about the Chiss, this is the place to go. I mean, this is really, really worth it. And the really cool thing about this is that it's still readily available. I don't know that you can buy it new in any stores or anything, but it's the sort of thing that, without much effort, you can find on eBay. People are willing to sort of sell them, and usually actually in a 4-volume set for really just a few bucks. So highly, highly recommended. Okay, so that's some of the Grosset and Dunlap stuff. Here's a smaller sort of contribution for, it's not just Clone Wars related, but I wanted to kind of throw it in anyway. And it's something from Random House, and it's a series of books that they called the Jedi Reader series. And the idea would be that you would use some of these books, you know, for your kids or whatever to sort of, you know, I think lots of teachers use these sorts of things. They're basic stories with lots of illustrations that are sort of centered around the flicks, supposed to inspire children to be reading at a very early age. And the idea is that you go from like the different levels. So you're a different level of Jedi reader. You start at 1, and I think it went all the way up to maybe 4 or something. They did only about a handful of books, a few for episode 1, a few for episode 2, and to my knowledge, I think they only did 1 or 2 for episode 3, and this is one of them. I have to, again, I've got all this stuff way behind me, partially on the shelf, partially in other rooms, and I'll have to pull all this stuff out someday. But again, this is just a sampling of some of this stuff, and this is I think the first one they did for episode 3, Obi-Wan's Foe. So, you know, here you go. You got Grievous. Actually, it's pretty cool. You got Grievous before he became entirely a cyborg over here. So, you know, is it worth picking up? Are you going to learn a lot more about the Star Wars EU? You know, yes and no. It depends. I sort of feel like, in the case of all this stuff, it's like, again, worst thing, you end up buying more than you need. Worst case, you've got something that's just a straight up adaptation or just a simple reference guide. But hey, it's fun to look at. It's more Star Wars, and that's all good, right? So I think the final thing to look at is DK's publishing stuff. Now, DK you're familiar with if you've seen like the reference guides, the incredible cross sections, things like this. But they did a lot for the Clone Wars. Lots of very sort of small children's oriented books, very tiny, like the Random House, kind of a mix of text and content. The really tricky thing about these is that DK also publishes lots of guides like this. Things like What is a Wookiee? Things like Journey Through Space. Those are the sorts of things that I think have always confused fans both of the Clone Wars content and just Star Wars stuff in general, because is it is it worth picking up? Is it just a kind of a pointless reference guide or not? It just really depends, and there's no really sort of easy, clear guide. I'd like to make one someday, but there's no really clear and easy way of understanding before you buy these things whether or not you learn anything in like what is a Wookiee that you don't know from somewhere else in the EU. There are some of these things though, like A Queen's Diary, that you are going to want to pick up. Again, it's a tiny children's book with a mix of illustrations and content, and you don't learn much. I mean, on any given page, I mean, we learn things like, hey, Amidala was the, Queen of Naboo. Okay, great, right? But it's written like her diary. So you learn little tiny scraps of things about her that you didn't otherwise know. So is that worth picking up? Absolutely. The cool thing, again, like I said before, is that worst case, if you ended up getting everything that DK puts out like this, it's only going to cost you a couple of bucks. These things you can find, they're practically giving them away at used bookstores in the children's section. Worst case, you end up with a little bit more than you need, and you end up with the cool stuff that you really want to learn more about the EU. So that's kind of the quick overview. DK, Random House, gosh, that is Scholastic. The list just goes on and on. There's just so many things, and this is what's so cool about the Star Wars Legends EU, is that just when you think you've read everything, just when you think I've read all the adult novels, I've read the comics, it's like you have not even scratched the surface if you haven't looked at the children's stuff. And this stuff, we're just talking about the Clone Wars, right? This isn't even getting into everything else that's been put out for decades, right? That's oriented for children. I mean, someday I'll do a whole video just on like the old Ewoks books and things like that. So in the meantime, enjoy this stuff. And I just say too that the only thing you'll ever want to sort of be careful about with some of this Clone Wars stuff is that when it comes to like DK and things like that, DK is still publishing some of these things, and so they're publishing them now in sort of the Disney era. So you just want to be careful. If you are just interested in Star Wars Legends stuff, just bear that in mind. You don't want to accidentally be picking up something from The Force Awakens or a reference guide that sort of delves into things Episode 7 oriented. So just keep that in mind. And it's a challenging issue, I think, in general, and it's probably something I should have said up front. It's just that people have different views about the Clone Wars, particularly the Filoni Clone Wars, right? I mean, I don't think anyone thinks they shouldn't be a part of the EU canon, but we're in a weird position now where they're both Star Wars and Legends, and that can kind of get confusing. Particularly when it comes to like some of the comics, like the very last Dark Horse comic before the license turned back over to Marvel, the Darth Maul comic, Son of Dathomir. I mean, I think there are still debates people have about whether that's because it's based on the Filoni Clone Wars, is it both EU and canon, or the Star Wars canon at least. There are some who want to say now that it's just Star Wars canon. It gets really confusing, folks. I guess the only great thing about that one is that that's so incredibly expensive now. I think so few were printed. I mean, it's going to cost you hundreds of dollars to find the trade paperback. That if that's the case, fine. Then let's call it Star Wars canon, and then I don't need to pick it up. All right, that's it for today. Talk to you later.